Hello and welcome everyone. So this video is going to be over Chapter 7 in the OpenStax Principles of Microeconomics text. Chapter 7 is about production costs and industry structure. If you haven't already, you can get a copy of the OpenStax text for free. You go to openstax.org, then under Subjects you go to Business, and then you go to Economics, and you can get the book. Click here. You could even just click to view online or download the PDF or click through to get the book splash page or whatever. The view online is useful, though I don't think it has page numbers. I've been saying it doesn't. Let me just make sure that it doesn't. Yeah, there's no page numbers, right? Instead, what you want to do is download the PDF if you care about being able to check back or whatever. For this particular lecture, it's like moderately useful might be my Substack, intermediatemicroeconomics.substack.com. My principles one is microeconomicprinciples.substack.com. I mentioned that in some of the other videos, but moderately useful here might be the Chapter 7, Production Functions, Chapter 8, Costs and Cost Curves. Everything else is going to be at a level kind of too high for this particular lecture. So I don't know how useful it might be for you now. Okay, so the lecture actually starts out with some background information, then goes into explicit costs, accounting costs, and economic profit, short run, production cost, and production and costs in the long run. So that's going to be the plan here. All right, so we have the example of Amazon, economies of scale. Economies of scale refer to the situation where producing at a lower volume gives us lower average costs, right? So there's kind of usually the example we might give would be like the factory example. So if you want to make a car in your own garage, you could. It would take a really long time, but you could do it. And the costs, the labor, the materials, opportunity costs of your time, really high. When you produce a car in a factory and when companies make a really large volume, the per unit cost is way lower. And that's economies of scale. Amazon's an American international electronic commerce company that sells books, among other things, shipping them directly to the consumer. Actually, you probably even want to think of Amazon as a software company. For a very long time, they're not even profitable on their physical goods side. That might have changed in 2020. I should look back. It may not have. Amazon was only profitable on their Amazon Web Services and whatever. So anyway, I'm just saying it's awkward to describe them as a bookseller. Okay, major reason for the giant retailer's success is its production model and cost structure, which has enabled Amazon to undercut competitors' price, even factoring in the cost of shipping. Yeah, there's more to the Amazon example too. So there's some interesting. I won't get into it here. It's another lecture entirely. But there are more reasons than just economies of scale behind Amazon's ability to outcompete smaller companies. All right, so firm or producer or business is an organization that combines inputs of land, labor, and capital, or raw or finished components, materials to produce outputs. So here we're defining a firm, like a company, as an entity that combines inputs into outputs. And it could be inputs into outputs that are physical outputs or services, like non-physical. Private enterprise is just the ownership of businesses by private individuals as opposed to the government, for instance. Production is literally the process of transforming inputs into outputs, ideally of a value greater than the value of the inputs. If not, that's a bad company, right? And that does happen. All right, so here's a spectrum of competition across different market structures. So if we have a lot of firms selling an identical product, we're thinking about perfect competition. If we have a single firm selling, no similar product because they're the only seller, you have a monopoly. And everything in between has is on kind of a scale. So if you have many firms selling slightly different products, then you have monopolistic competition. That's a good example of this is like the local restaurant market, right? Fast food or whatever, or t-shirts or something, apparel, hats, right? There's lots of different styles. That's monopolistic competition. Few firms selling identical or similar products. So that's like an oligopoly. You think of automakers, for instance, like the major manufacturers of cars, right? Or electric vehicles. Okay. Firms face different competitive situations. At one extreme, perfect competition. Many firms are selling identical products. At the other extreme, monopoly. Only one firm selling the product, and this firm faces no competition. Though they might have to worry about entry, right? Because they need barriers to entry to protect their monopoly power because they don't want an oligopoly. Monopolistic competition is a situation where many firms are selling similar but not identical products, and an oligopoly is where we have a few firms selling similar or identical products. Okay, here's explicit implicit costs, accounting and economic profit. So profit is total revenue minus total cost, right? So total revenue minus total cost, that's like literally the definition, and that's a pretty good formula. So usually the formula we'd write would be profit. Sorry, this is gonna be loud, but I want this by I want to type this out. TR minus TC. And then the version of the formula I like giving is profit is price minus average total cost, which we'll define in this lecture, times quantity. The reason, and this is algebraically equivalent to the one above it, the reason why I encourage students to think of profits this way is because this is like the vertical side of the profit box on a graph, and then quantity is on the horizontal axis. So this is like a square or a rectangle, length times width. And I think that's helpful to see. Okay, but if you don't like that, just kind of forget about that for now. Revenue is the income a firm generates from selling its products. Total revenue is price times quantity. So this is price times quantity, and then this is cost as a function of quantity. Explicit costs are out-of-pocket cash outlays, actual payments. This is like wages, rent, and so on. Implicit costs are generally opportunity costs. So this is the opportunity cost of using resources a firm already owns. It could be like depreciation of goods, materials, equipment. This is also the opportunity cost of their time, right? Okay. Accounting profit is just literally total revenue minus explicit costs. Just total revenue, didn't mean to move that. Total revenue minus obvious costs. Economic profit is going to be total revenue minus total costs, which includes implicit costs. So anytime I write this formula or any other economist writes this formula, we're thinking about economic profit. So we're thinking about this total cost, including also implicit opportunity costs, right? That's the idea. Total cost includes explicit and implicit costs. What this means is economic profit is going to be no larger than accounting profit. Put differently, accounting profit is always at least as big as economic profit and sometimes bigger, because accounting profit deducts fewer costs. Economic profit deducts more costs, right? Because economic profit pays attention to opportunity cost. What that means is, as a consequence, when there's zero economic profit, there's still potentially accounting profit if there's the presence of implicit costs. If there's no implicit costs, zero economic profit is also zero accounting profit. But in most examples where we're talking about zero economic profit, there is accounting profit. Okay, so production in the short run. Production process for pizza includes ingredients, inputs like ingredients, effort of the pizza maker, tools, materials for cooking and serving, right? All right. Categories of factors of production, inputs. These are resources the firm uses to produce their products. So natural resources, land, labor, capital, technology, and entrepreneurship is an important production input. The production function, this is a mathematical equation that tells how much output you can produce with given amounts of inputs. We don't actually do much with production function in this class, in this text. In the intermediate level and in my Substack, I show like actual production functions. It's just helpful to think of production, think of output as taking as the dependent variable of this function that's taking in inputs and kicking out an output. So the idea is my production function is going to combine all these things and R, L, K, T, and E to produce some Q. That's the idea. Fixed inputs and variable inputs. Fixed inputs are capital. In the intermediate micro course, we typically use K for capital. Variable inputs, labor. In the intermediate micro course, we usually use L for labor. Fixed inputs are those that can't be adjusted in the time period we're thinking about. Variable inputs are those that can easily be adjusted. So the production function, typically we just say Q is a function of L and K, labor and capital, or variable and fixed inputs. The short run is just the period of time in which at least some factors of production are fixed, and the long run is the period in which all factors are variable. Importantly, short run versus long run doesn't have anything to do with time. So it's not like a long time or a short time or a couple of months versus a couple of years. Nope. You're in the short run if there's at least one fixed cost or one fixed factor, and you're in the long run if all costs, all factors are variable, right? So in the short run, if you've already paid rent for your retail space, or you've already decided on your factory or something like that, that's a short run decision. If you can renegotiate or determine like a new location for your storefront, or decide whether to rent that space or not, or if you can decide what size and what scale of factory you're going to use, those are all long run situations. Production in the short run may be explored through the example of lumberjacks using a 2-person saw. Okay, so I don't know where they're going with this. Okay, so my quantity is going to be my total product, which is going to be the output of taking labor and capital. Okay, my capital is going to be the saw. My labor are going to be these two characters, and then I guess like their shift work, or the shift boss who's inspecting their effort, I guess. All right, so since K is fixed in the short run, capital is fixed, the amount of output, trees cut down per day, depends only on the amount of labor, number of lumberjacks working. Okay, so in the short run, we fixed our amount of capital. We can't adjust the amount of saws, for instance, we have. We can adjust the number of workers. If we have 2 workers, we can saw some logs. If we have just 1 worker, probably not as good. If we have more than 2, somebody can work while somebody else is taking a break. Okay. All right, so now we'll talk about marginal product. Marginal product is the additional output per 1 more worker. Let's use the lumberjack example since they bothered to put that in the slide deck. The marginal product is how many additional trees we get when we hire 1 more worker. Okay, so if we have our 2 workers, maybe we can saw however many logs per hour. If we add an additional worker, maybe we can saw more logs per hour because one of the 2 existing workers can get a break, right? And the additional logs per hour that we're able to saw is the marginal product, right? Diminishing marginal productivity this is a rule that as the firm employs more labor, eventually the amount of output declines. This is a good example for this because, okay, suppose we're running a team of 2 workers and we add 2 more workers. So now we've got 4 workers. That's great because we can keep our saw moving throughout the span of the hour while our team of 2 who are working and then our 2 more hypothetical workers can spell them, can get a break, right? What if I have 3 teams of 2 or 4 teams of 2? Well, that's not so good because then we have more people taking a break than working, right? And the idea is if I go from 2 people to 4 people, I'm getting more logs than I was before. If I go from 1 to 2 workers, or 2 to 3 or 2 to 4, maybe even up to 6 workers, so I have teams working 15 minutes and getting really, really tired and then eventually taking breaks and then cycling back through, maybe we can kind of optimize our production. But before long, if we just have a lot of people standing around, we're not getting a lot of additional extra logs. That's diminishing marginal productivity, meaning as we add more labor, the amount of additional output declines. And the reason why is because of a bottleneck. We don't have enough saws. So if I'm hiring additional teams of workers, I need to, in order to avoid diminishing marginal product, I need more saws, is the idea. So diminishing marginal productivity, that happens because of bottlenecks, typically because your fixed factor is the limiting factor. Okay, so here's our short run total product for trees. Here's the number of trees. Here's the number of lumberjacks, right? So as the number of lumberjacks increases, the output also increases until 5 lumberjacks are reached. All right, so 5 must be the amount where we start. We definitely have diminishing marginal product, right? Going from 1 to 2 is really helpful. Going from 2 to 3 was still kind of helpful because we can have somebody resting. Going from 3 to 4 was helpful because now we could have 2 people resting. Although I dispute this. I bet if we ran teams, we could probably get a much steeper incline here. This is tailing off before I would set it to tail off. Fine, whatever. But going from 4 to 5 doesn't really help too much because you don't need 3 people taking a break with 2 people working. The bottom graph shows that as more workers are added, marginal product increases at first, but then decreases. Yeah. And eventually could get negative, right? Because if we have like 6 workers and that means you've got 2 people working and 4 people standing around, maybe those 2 people standing around are going to distract, 4 people standing around are going to distract our 2 workers or whatever. And that's a problem. Okay, so here's the general case of the total product curve. And then here's the general case of the marginal product curve. So rising and then flattening is total product, and then marginal product is going to rise initially, then fall, right? Marginal product, if you know calculus, is the first derivative of the total product curve. That's the idea. All right, factor payments. This is what the firm pays for the use of the factors of production. So you can think of this as like the wage to hire labor or something, or the price of raw materials and or rent and so on and so forth. Variable costs are the costs of variable inputs like labor. So wage is a variable cost to the firm. Fixed costs are the costs of the fixed inputs like rent. At least that's fixed in the short run. In the long run, that can be a variable cost, of course. That's maybe the expenditure the firm has to make before it can even start producing. Doesn't change in the short run, doesn't change regardless of the level of production, right? So that's actually kind of key. Fixed costs are invariant to the level of output. Total cost is the sum of fixed costs and variable costs of production, right? So like in the lumberjack example, I've got a fixed cost of however many saws to buy. I'm paying that cost whether I hire any workers and whether I saw any logs, right? If I want to saw a bunch of logs, now I need to hire a bunch of workers. Okay, so that's going to increase my variable cost, but it doesn't change my fixed cost unless I get more saws, right? I can also drive my total cost, the variable portion of my total cost, to zero by not hiring any workers. But if I've already paid my fixed cost, I can't drive that to zero. I've already incurred it. In that sense, in the short run, the fixed cost is a sunk cost. Okay, average total cost is just total cost divided by output. Marginal cost is the first derivative, if you know calculus, of total cost. If you don't worry about it. Marginal cost is the incremental change in total cost, right? So this delta is like a derivative d. This delta is like a derivative d. So this is dTc dQ. Don't worry about that otherwise. This delta just means change. So and this is like change in total cost, change in total quantity. So I'd have my current total cost minus my previous total cost, my current output minus my previous output. That'd be the change. That's all that's doing. Average variable cost is the variable cost divided by the quantity of output. Okay, so that's just VC divided by Q. Okay, so here's my graph. This is total cost, this is output, and so total cost is rising. My fixed cost here is 160. That's saying that whether I produce 0 or however many, my fixed cost is going to be 160. I've got to pay 160 for my productive capital, basically. As production increases, variable costs get added to fixed costs. So now I'm hiring additional workers or using additional inputs or whatever. And then my fixed cost just stays at 160. All the rest, all this increase in cost is just because of rising variable cost. You could actually calculate the variable cost at each level of output by just subtracting from the vertical, subtracting 160 from the vertical. As the production increases, variable costs are added to the fixed cost. Total cost is the sum of the two. Average total cost is generally U-shaped. So that's this right here. Whoops, that's this right here. This is marginal cost. And then this is average variable cost. Marginal cost is going to cross average variable cost and average total cost from below at its respective minimum. That's because of the relationship between marginal and average. I'll come back to that in a second. Average variable cost lies below average total cost, typically also U-shaped or upward sloping. Marginal cost generally upward sloping. All right, so marginal cost has to cross average variable cost and average total cost from their respective minimums. And the reason why is the relationship between marginal and average. Think about like baseball or softball. Think about like your batting average in a particular game versus over the season. So if you have a really good game and your batting average for that game is really high, it'll bring up your season average. If you have a really bad game and you have a low batting average, it'll bring down your season average. So anytime your game batting average is higher than your season batting average rises. Anytime your game Single game batting average is below your season average, it lowers your average. Same thing with GPA, like your quarterly GPA or like term GPA versus your career GPA. And the idea is like my season long batting average is like my average. My contribution of an individual game is my marginal. So anytime marginal cost is vertically higher than average cost is going up. Look at this. Just look at the vertical measure of cost. Anytime my marginal cost curve, anytime marginal costs are just like vertically higher than average cost is moving up. Right? So here marginal cost is above average cost and the curvature of average cost is increasing. Same thing here. Anytime marginal cost is below average cost, so here marginal cost is vertically lower than average cost is going down. And here, this is marginal cost. This is just like literally vertically lower than average variable cost. Now average variable cost is going down. That's that same principle. Okay. Average profit or the profit margin is price minus average cost. That was close related to the definition I gave at the very beginning, which is price minus average total cost, and then multiply that by quantity gives you total profits. If the market price is greater than average cost, average profit's positive. If price is less than average cost, profits are negative. Production in the long run. In the long run, all factors, including capital, are variable. Production function would look like this, just like all production functions. Because all factors are variable in the long run production function shows the most efficient way of producing any level of output. The logic here is that you can choose your efficient scale. So in the long run, you don't have in the short run, one of your factors is fixed, typically capital. So like I've got a pretzel cart, I want to sell pretzels, I had to rent the pretzel cart, and then I have to buy the constituent ingredients for my pretzels. Well, maybe actually I don't want one pretzel cart, I want 2 or 3 or 4. In the long run, I can choose the optimal number of pretzel carts to run. That's the idea. So in the long run, my capital, my amount of pretzel carts is a variable cost. The long run is the period of time when all costs are variable. Production technologies give us alternative methods in combining inputs to produce output. So for our purposes here, it's not kind of as relevant. In the intermediate course, we'll give different functional forms to production technologies. So here's real quick how you could think about this. Suppose this concerns like the substitutability, for instance, of like labor and capital. So suppose labor and capital are perfect substitutes. You could use either labor or capital to produce your output. So we're seeing this in a lot of cases where AI models are replacing humans, right? So the idea is like maybe we think there's some conversion factor through which we can substitute human labor for AI agents or something like that. You could also think of production technologies where labor and capital are complements. And I think actually maybe that's the better way to think about it, is that AI is a tool, and maybe we better think of like humans and software as complements. And so you need these in some fixed components, some fixed proportion. So for every machine, you need a certain number of workers. For every AI agent, you need a certain number of humans working with them. It might be something like that. But anyway, it depends on the industry and depends on the example. Whether labor and capital are substitutes primarily or complements primarily, used in place of each other or used with each other, speaks to the different alternative methods of combining those inputs to get our output. Economies of scale is a situation where as quantity of output goes up, cost per unit goes down. I said this at the very beginning with the Amazon example. Economies of scale means as the volume increases, the per unit cost goes down. This is economies of scale. So this is my average cost of production, and this is going down. This is like the left side of so this is average total cost curve. This is like the downsloping portion of my U-shaped average cost. It's going to go up like this eventually. So what this says is as I ramp up production, my average costs fall. So here we have a small factory making 1,000 units and their average cost is 12. Here we have a slightly larger company, well, double the size, producing 2,000 units and their cost is 8. So, and then we have a really large factory over here, they're producing 5,000, their average cost is 4. So this is economies of scale. As we increase our output, our average costs are falling. Right? Okay. The long run average cost curve shows the lowest possible average cost of production, allowing all the inputs in production to vary so that firm is choosing its production technology. We'll have to see this graphically on the next slide for that to make sense. Short run average cost is the average total cost curve in the short run, shows the total of the average fixed costs and the average variable costs. I don't know if I can even make sense of this last line. I don't know what that's saying. So the short run average cost curve basically is your average total cost curve in the short run. And it's comprised of your fixed cost and your variable costs, but not just fixed cost and variable cost, your average fixed cost and average variable cost. So let's see, the total of your average, it should say shows, yeah, the total of your average fixed cost and the average variable cost. I don't know. So in the short run average total cost curve is going to have the average fixed cost component and the average variable cost component. Here's the better way to see this. So the blue line is my long run average cost curve. And these magenta lines are all different types of short run average cost curves. And what's happening here is each of these short run average cost curves we've got in this graph correspond to different levels of our fixed cost. So different factory sizes, basically. So like in my pretzel cart example, maybe this is my short run average cost curve if I have one pretzel cart. And here's my short run average cost curve if I got 2 pretzel carts that I'm selling. And here's 3 pretzel carts and 4 and 5. And the idea is in the long run, I'm able to determine what's the efficient scale. So how many pretzel carts do I want to select? Well, what I'll do is I'll pick which is going to be the lowest average cost curve, which is the lowest short run average cost curve, right? And then that determines my efficient scale. In the short run, I can't do that. I'm just locked in the one cart that I rented. So I pick the optimal spot of production along that cost curve, which might be inefficient relative to the long run average cost is the idea. In the long run, all costs are variable. So I'm effectively selecting which of the 5 curves I want to be on. There's actually infinitely many curves along here, but we drew 5 according to which scale of production I want to use. Right, so this represents the different level of fixed costs from the low level of fixed costs at SRAC 1 to the high level at SRAC 5. Other short run average cost curves lie between them. Yeah, there's infinitely many. The long run average cost curve shows the lowest cost of producing the quantity when fixed costs vary. So it's formed by the bottom edge. Yeah, this entire family of short run cost curves. If a firm wished to produce quantity 3, it would choose the fixed costs associated with 3. So I said maybe this is like 3 pretzel carts or something like that. Okay. Constant returns to scale is a situation when expanding all inputs proportionally does not change the average cost of production. Diseconomies of scale is the long run average cost of producing each individual unit increases as total output increases. This is interesting, but these are 2 very different concepts, and they've selected 2 that I wouldn't naturally compare. Okay, so let me clarify what they're doing here. Returns to scale refers to how much additional output do I get when I, for instance, double the amount of inputs. So if I double the amount of labor and capital and get double the output, I have constant returns to scale. What's missing here is if I double the amount of inputs and I get more than double the amount of output, I have increasing returns to scale, right? So I double the number of workers and I double the number of machines and I get more than double the amount of output. That might sound silly. How could you do that? Well, maybe there's complementarities where my teams of workers are able to help each other out. So in the aggregate, they can produce more. If I double the amount of workers and double the amount of capital and I get less than double the output, that's decreasing returns to scale. Okay, so returns to scale has to do with if I change the amount of inputs, how does my output change? Economies of scale pertains to if I change the amount of output, how do my costs change? There's economies to scale where as I increase the volume of output, average costs fall. There's constant returns to scale or whatever when if I where I'm at the constant returns to scale is where I'm at the level of inputs and level of output where my average costs are not changing. And then there's diseconomies of scale when I go beyond that point. So as I increase my amount of output, my costs actually rise. And there's a bottleneck story there as well. So diseconomies of scale is a firm or factory can grow so large it becomes difficult to manage or run efficiently. It's basically the limitations in this case of like managerial oversight or like physical limitations or something like that. Okay, size and number of firms in the industry. The shape of the long-run average cost curve has implications for how many firms can compete, whether the firms in the industry have many sizes, or whether they tend to be the same size. Best way to see that is with their graphical example. So here's the long-run average cost curve and the size of the number of firms. If we have this nice U-shaped long-run average cost curve, then at the efficient scale, we'll have like basically one type of firm. They produce 1,000 units of output. If we have this really flat bottomed average cost curve, now there's a lot of different possible efficient firms, all the way between R and S, producing anywhere from 5,000 up to 20,000 units of output. Right? So graph A, lowest cost firms are going to produce output at R, 10,000 units of output, and that's going to be the only type of firm that can survive in this industry. This is a clear minimum. Any firm producing anything else is going to have higher costs, and presumably they're going to get undercut by the more efficient R-type firms. Right? So a firm producing a quantity of 10,000 has a lower cost than anything producing 5,000 or 20,000. For graph B, the R-type firm is not actually more efficient than the S-type firms. Right? So actually any of the lowest cost firms, or there's a lot of different low cost means of production, anywhere between 5,000 and 20,000. So any firm producing anywhere between 5,000 and 20,000 can compete effectively, not get undercut. Now anything producing less than 5,000 or more than 20,000 will be inefficient and would be undercut by the more efficient firms between the R-type production process and the S-type. Okay. Oh, that brings us to the end here. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next